before a canoe ever moves, before a single paddle touches water, there is something else that must be felt. Not seen, not heard, felt. The faint push of air against skin, the shift of warmth on the back of a hand. The breath of the ocean arrives long before its waves. In the Society Islands, some learn to read this invisible language, a language written in wind and in silence, in the space between gust and calm. This is the story of those first lessons, of apprentices who were told, "Close your eyes and feel where the island ends. Because before you can sail, you must learn how to listen without listening." The mornings in the Society Islands began with a soft whisper, a delicate stirring of air that hinted at the day's unfolding. For those born among these scattered gems of volcanic rock and coral, the wind was more than a mere breath of nature. It was a language, an ever-present companion, and a guide across the vast Pacific expanse. To the apprentice navigators, the wind was something to be measured not by instruments or charts, but by touch, by feel, and by the quiet attentiveness cultivated over years of practice. In a small village nestled among coconut groves and flowering hibiscus, a group of young apprentices gathered under the shade of a towering breadfruit tree. Their mentor, Hina, was a woman whose calm presence belied the depth of knowledge held within her hands and heart. She had spent decades reading the wind, deciphering its stories, and passing that wisdom to the next generation. Today, she would begin the lessons that would mark the apprentice's first real encounter with the wind's subtle signals. Lessons not written in words, but etched in sensation. Hina began by asking the apprentices to close their eyes and extend their hands before them, palms up, as if offering themselves to the invisible. The air was still, save for the faintest brush of breeze that caressed skin and rustled leaves. "Feel," she said softly, "not with your eyes or ears, but with your fingertips. The wind is alive. It moves, it changes, it speaks. If you listen carefully, you will learn what it means." The apprentices leaned into the moment, focusing on the shifting patterns of air flowing over their skin. Some felt a barely noticeable coolness. Others sensed a gentle vibration or the brush of a distant current. Hina explained that these nuances were clues, indicators of distant weather changes, oceanic shifts, and even the presence of nearby islands or reefs. To the untrained, such sensations might seem insignificant or even imagined. But in the Society Islands, these whispers of wind were vital. They were the first signs of a storm approaching, or a change in tide. They were the subtle nudges that helped navigators adjust their sails or course before the sea itself could be seen or heard. Hina led the apprentices to the beach, where a single voyaging canoe rested on the shore, its curved hull gleaming softly in the morning light. The canoe was a vessel of stories, of journeys marked by stars and swells. But today it would serve as a classroom for a different kind of lesson, one grounded in the sensory connection between human and environment. As they settled aboard, Hina instructed each apprentice to hold their hand just above the surface of the water, feeling the faint ripple of breeze mingling with the rising heat of the sun. She spoke of the wind's many faces, the gentle trade winds that blew steadily across the islands, the sudden gusts that signaled a shift in weather, and the barely perceptible changes that might herald the approach of far-off storms. "Every breeze has a story," Hina said. "You will learn to read those stories not by looking, but by feeling. Your fingertips will become your eyes, your skin, your compass." Over the coming days, the apprentices would spend hours outside, away from tools and maps, simply listening to the wind, watching how it moved through the palm fronds, how it carried scents from distant shores, and how it shifted with the coming and going of the sun. They learned to note the difference between the salt-laden breath of ocean air and the warmer, earthier gusts from the interior. They began to distinguish the faint but distinct signals carried by the wind before a storm's arrival, practicing patience as they waited for the invisible messages to reveal themselves. The training was slow and methodical. There were no shortcuts or quick lessons. Hina reminded them often that mastering the wind's language was not a matter of speed, but of presence. "You cannot measure wind like you measure distance," she said. "You must become part of it. Let it move through you and teach you." The apprentices recorded no charts, drew no maps. Their lessons were intangible, carried in sensation and memory. Yet in these subtle connections lay the foundation of survival and navigation, a wisdom passed down through countless generations who had trusted their very lives to the lessons of air and sea. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened, Hina gathered the apprentices by the edge of the lagoon. The air was calm, almost still, and the sky blushed with the soft hues of evening. She handed each apprentice a small feather, light and delicate, and instructed them to release it into the air. "Watch how the wind carries this feather," she said. "Learn its movements, its flow, its changes. This is not just a game. It is a way to see what cannot be seen." The feathers fluttered upward, twisting and turning in the gentle breeze, sometimes lingering, sometimes swept away with sudden urgency. The apprentices observed, their eyes tracing the unpredictable paths, learning to anticipate and interpret. Hina smiled quietly. "The wind will never be the same twice. It is alive, always changing, always teaching. Your task is to listen carefully, to trust what you feel, and to carry these lessons with you whenever you sail." As night fell and the stars emerged, the apprentices lay on the warm sand, gazing upward at the familiar constellations. The wind whispered softly around them, a living thread connecting past and present, earth and sky, teacher and student. In the quiet that followed, one question lingered in the air, unanswered and inviting. How deeply can one truly listen to the wind before it becomes not just a force outside, but a part of oneself? The days that followed were marked by a rhythm both steady and subtle. The apprentices found themselves drawn deeper into the delicate dialogue between wind and skin, learning to read patterns invisible to the eye, but unmistakable to the body. Each morning, before the sun had fully claimed the sky, they gathered on the beach, where Hina guided them through exercises of stillness and awareness. The early air was often cool and briny, carrying with it the remnants of night and the faintest hint of distant land or sea. Hina's lessons focused less on instruction and more on experience. She asked them to close their eyes and sense the slightest changes, the brushing of a breeze against the back of the neck, the faint shift of humidity that often preceded the arrival of the trade winds, the varying texture of air as it moved from open water to the shelter of the island's palm groves. It was not enough to simply feel the wind. They were learning to interpret it, to understand its stories, its moods, and its silent warnings. Over time, the apprentices began to notice patterns that had once escaped them. They realized that the wind could carry not only coolness or warmth, but also scents, subtle hints of flowering trees, salt spray, or the dampness of earth after rain. These fragrances, fleeting yet distinct, served as signposts on the endless ocean. They told of changes in weather, the proximity of land, or the shifting currents that would guide or hinder a voyage. One afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and the sky was painted with hues of gold and rose, Hina led the apprentices out to a small reef that jutted into the lagoon. Here, the wind played differently, twisting around coral formations, whispering through seagrass, and stirring the surface of shallow pools. The apprentices spread out, feeling the changes in air pressure, the subtle eddies, and the way the wind's strength varied with the movement of the tide. Hina explained that these micro-patterns were vital to understanding the environment. A skilled navigator did not rely solely on broad observations, but on the nuanced shifts that revealed hidden truths. She recounted stories of journeys where the failure to recognize these signals had led canoes dangerously off course or into the path of sudden storms. One apprentice, a young man named Tan, shared his own experience. He described a recent voyage during which a sudden gust had caught his canoe unexpectedly, forcing him to make a rapid adjustment to avoid capsizing. The lesson, he realized afterward, was in the way the air had changed just moments before, an almost imperceptible alteration in the wind's touch that had warned him of what was to come. The group discussed these experiences, realizing that their education was as much about patience and humility as it was about skill. The wind, they understood, was not a force to be controlled, but a partner to be respected and followed. It demanded attentiveness and a willingness to surrender to its ever-changing nature. As the weeks passed, Hina introduced more complex exercises. The apprentices practiced sensing wind changes not only in still air, but also during active movement, on the canoes as they cut through waves, and while climbing rocky outcrops where the wind's path was fragmented and unpredictable. These challenges taught them to remain grounded and present, even amid chaos. At night, the apprentices gathered beneath the stars, often with Hina and the elders, reflecting on the day's lessons. They shared observations, questions, and the quiet frustrations that accompanied such an intangible study. There were moments when the wind seemed to speak clearly, and others when it remained elusive, teasing their senses without revealing its secrets. One evening, as the fire's glow softened the faces around it, an elder named Mana told a story that resonated deeply. He spoke of his own apprenticeship long ago, when he had struggled to hear the wind's voice. "It is not enough to listen with your ears," he said. "You must listen with your whole being. The wind is a part of us, as we are a part of the wind. Only then can we truly understand." This idea lingered with the apprentices, inviting reflection beyond the immediate lessons. It suggested a merging of self and environment that transcended simple skill, a unity that was both physical and spiritual. One afternoon, as a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine across the village, the apprentices prepared for a test. Hina presented them with a small carved board, etched with lines representing different wind patterns and ocean currents. They were to place their hands above it and describe the sensation, matching it to the physical world they had experienced. The exercise proved difficult. While the board represented a tangible model, the true knowledge lay in the lived experience, the feel of the wind on skin, the subtle shifts that no drawing could fully capture. The apprentices grappled with this tension between representation and reality, between abstract knowledge and sensory understanding. Hina observed quietly and then offered a final reflection. Maps and charts are tools, but they are only as good as the hands that hold them and the hearts that trust them. The wind cannot be confined to lines on a board. It lives in motion, in feeling, in memory. As the test ended, Ray found herself standing alone on the shore, the board resting against a palm trunk. The breeze lifted her hair and brushed her face, and she realized that the lessons were far from over. The wind's language was infinite, unfolding endlessly like the ocean itself. She wondered, as she often did, how deeply one must listen to become truly fluent in this silent conversation. Was it a matter of years or a lifetime? Could one ever fully understand a force so intangible, so fleeting? The questions remained open, like the horizon stretching endlessly before her. The early morning light filtered gently through the canopy of coconut palms as the apprentices gathered once more by the shoreline. The air was still cool, carrying with it the faint saltiness of the ocean and the earthy aroma of damp sand. Today's lesson was different from the previous days, focused not solely on feeling the wind, but on understanding its patterns in relation to the shifting environment. Hina, their mentor, moved among them with quiet confidence, her eyes sharp yet patient. She began by guiding the apprentices to observe the movement of clouds above, a tapestry of wispy cirrus and low-hanging cumulus that foretold changes in weather. "The wind is a storyteller," she said softly. "It brings news from afar, weaving tales from the currents of the ocean and the warmth of the sun. To read the wind is to read these stories written across the sky. The apprentices watched attentively as the clouds slowly morphed and drifted, their shapes shifting like waves on the sea. Hina pointed out subtle signs, the thin, trailing edges of a cloud mass indicating the direction of high-altitude winds, the way the clouds thickened near the horizon, signaling the approach of a trade wind shift. Each movement, each pattern, is a message. The sky is as alive as the sea below. Following this, the group moved to the edge of the water, where small waves lapped softly against the coral reef. Here, Hina taught them to feel the interplay between wind and water, the way a breeze could ripple the ocean's surface, creating patterns that, once understood, spoke of distance and direction. When you learn to read the water's dance, she explained, you can anticipate what the wind will do next. The apprentices placed their hands lightly on the water, sensing the shifts beneath their fingers, the changes in wave height, the direction of swell, the gentle tug of currents. It was a lesson in subtlety and attentiveness, demanding a focus that went beyond sight and sound. They learned to recognize the language of the sea as a mirror to the wind's moods. Later that afternoon, as the heat of the day began to wane, Hina took the apprentices further inland, to a ridge overlooking the ocean. The view was expansive, offering a panorama of islands, reefs, and the endless blue beyond. Here, the wind told a different story, one shaped by the contours of the land, the heat rising from sun-baked stones, and the mixing of air masses. Hina explained how the topography influenced local wind patterns, creating eddies and gusts that could alter the course of a canoe unexpectedly. No journey is made without considering these effects, she said. The land and sea speak to each other through the wind. To navigate well, you must listen to both. The apprentices watched as the wind shifted suddenly, rustling through the trees and scattering leaves like whispers across the earth. They felt the subtle drop in temperature as a cool current swept down the ridge, a reminder that the wind was a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving. That evening, gathered around the communal fire, the apprentices shared their experiences. They spoke of moments when the wind had seemed to speak clearly, guiding their senses and decisions, and others when it had remained elusive, a silent force testing their patience. Their voices carried a mix of wonder and humility, a recognition that mastery was a journey rather than a destination. Hina listened, her gaze steady. The wind teaches us more than navigation, she said. It teaches us about ourselves, our limits, our resilience, and our connection to the world. To follow the wind is to follow a path of respect and understanding. The nights that followed were filled with quiet reflection. Some apprentices found themselves waking to the sound of the breeze, their minds attuned to its movements even in sleep. Others practiced silently, holding their hands out to catch the faintest shifts in air, training their senses to a heightened awareness. One apprentice, Moana, spoke of a dream where the wind spoke in voices, soft and clear, telling stories of ancestors and voyages long past. She awoke with a new determination to listen more deeply, to honor the legacy carried in every gust. The physical lessons continued as well. The apprentices practiced adjusting sails in response to changing winds, learning to feel the tug and pull of air on fabric and wood. They understood that their bodies were instruments as much as their eyes, hands, and ears. The balance between control and surrender was delicate, requiring both confidence and humility. Hina emphasized that no lesson was ever truly finished. Each voyage brought new challenges and fresh insights. The wind was unpredictable by nature and its language forever unfolding. The goal was not to conquer, but to harmonize, to become part of the eternal dialogue between sky, sea, and human spirit. As the section drew to a close, Ray sat quietly on a rock overlooking the ocean. The wind brushed her face gently, carrying with it the distant cries of seabirds and the scent of wet coral. She realized that the apprentice's journey was a reflection of life itself, full of questions, discoveries, and the slow, patient cultivation of knowledge. In the silent meeting of air and skin, she sensed a truth beyond words, that to navigate by the wind was to trust the unseen, to move with grace in uncertainty, and to honor the threads connecting past, present, and future. What further lessons would the wind whisper next? And how deeply could one truly listen before the voice became part of the self? The sun had barely risen above the horizon when the apprentices assembled once again at the water's edge. The gentle hum of the early morning filled the air, the rustling of palm fronds, the distant call of seabirds, and the steady lapping of waves against the shore. This day's lesson would challenge their growing understanding of the wind, pushing them beyond simple sensation into the realm of prediction and subtle interpretation. Hina began by gathering the group near a weathered outcrop of coral and volcanic stone that jutted into the lagoon. She gestured toward the horizon, where the sky blended seamlessly with the sea. "The wind does not act alone," she said. "It is part of a system, a dance between the ocean, the land, and the atmosphere. To understand it is to understand the relationships that shape the environment around us." The apprentices listened closely as Hina explained the interconnectedness of natural forces. She spoke of the trade winds, those steady breezes that had guided Polynesian voyagers across vast distances for centuries. But she also emphasized the variability, the way these winds could shift with the seasons, influenced by the rising and setting of the sun, the temperature of the water, and distant storms far beyond the visible horizon. To illustrate these ideas, Hina led the apprentices through a series of observations and experiments. They measured the temperature of the air and water, noted the direction and strength of the breeze, and watched the patterns of clouds and waves. They learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated a change was imminent. The scent of moisture carried on the wind, the shift in the angle of sunlight filtered through clouds, the movement of birds seeking shelter. These lessons were slow and deliberate. There were no sudden revelations or dramatic moments, only the quiet accumulation of knowledge, built from patient observation and thoughtful reflection. Hina reminded the apprentices that mastery came not from rushing, but from attentiveness, a willingness to listen deeply and wait for understanding to emerge. One particularly calm afternoon, the apprentices ventured beyond the lagoon to a small ridge overlooking the open ocean. Here, the wind was freer, less constrained by the land, and more subject to the vast forces of the Pacific. Hina pointed out the way the wind moved across the waves, lifting whitecaps and bending the tops of distant palms. She challenged the apprentices to describe the changes they observed and to connect them with the lessons of previous days. Tane, who had spoken earlier of his experience with sudden gusts, noted how the wind seemed to pulse in waves, sometimes stronger, sometimes almost absent, like the beating of a heart. Hina nodded approvingly, explaining that these oscillations were part of the natural rhythm of the ocean and atmosphere, influenced by the interplay of temperature, pressure, and geography. The apprentices practiced predicting shifts in the wind's strength and direction, testing their sense of touch and intuition against the ever-changing conditions. They learned to adjust their bodies and the canoe accordingly, seeking balance amid constant movement. As days turned into weeks, the apprentices began to integrate their lessons into actual voyages. Under Hina's watchful eye, they set out into the lagoon and beyond, applying their growing skills in real conditions. They faced challenges, unpredictable gusts, shifting swells, sudden calms, but each obstacle was a chance to deepen their understanding and refine their response. The process was not without frustration. There were moments when the wind seemed to deceive them, when their senses betrayed uncertainty. Yet these experiences were embraced as part of the journey, opportunities to practice patience, humility, and resilience. At night, the apprentices gathered again around the communal fire. The elders shared stories of their own voyages and the lessons learned through years of listening to the wind. These tales were often quiet and unembellished, focusing on the mundane details that had made all the difference. The slight change in a breeze that had saved a canoe from capsizing, the scent of rain on the wind that had warned of a coming storm. Ray found these stories especially grounding. They reminded her that navigation was less about grand adventure and more about attentiveness to the everyday, about honoring the subtle cues that connected the voyager to the world. One evening, as the fire's glow flickered against the darkening sky, Hina spoke of the deeper dimensions of their lessons. "The wind is a teacher of many things," she said softly. "Not only how to move across the sea, but how to move through life. It asks us to be present, to be patient, and to trust in the unseen." She paused, looking around the circle. To measure the wind in your fingertips is to learn humility. It is to recognize that you are part of a greater whole, a web of relationships that stretch across time and space. The apprentices sat in thoughtful silence, absorbing the weight of these words. The night air carried a gentle breeze, a soft reminder of the lessons held in every gust and sigh. As the section came to a close, Ray stood at the water's edge, feeling the cool touch of the wind against her skin. The vast ocean before her seemed both familiar and mysterious, a constant source of challenge and comfort. She understood now that their journey with the wind was far from over, that each day would bring new discoveries, new questions. What new lessons awaited in the unseen currents of air? How could one ever fully grasp a force so alive, so entwined with the pulse of the world itself? The morning dawned with a gentle haze hanging over the Society Islands, softening the edges of the distant mountains and casting a muted light across the shimmering lagoon. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth, mingling with the faint fragrance of blooming frangipani and gardenia that grew in scattered patches along the shore. For the apprentices gathered beneath the spreading canopy of a great banyan tree, this day marked another step in their journey of understanding. The art of reading the wind, not just as a force of nature, but as a living presence that shaped their world and their lives. Hina stood quietly before them, her gaze steady as she regarded the young faces full of anticipation and quiet determination. Her hands, worn from years of guiding both canoes and minds, rested gently at her sides. "Today," she began, "we delve deeper into the dance between wind and water, the conversation that guides every voyage, every crossing, every return." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a calm authority that invited focus and reflection. The apprentices listened intently as Hina spoke of the interwoven nature of air and sea, explaining how the wind stirred the surface of the ocean, creating patterns of waves and ripples that could be read like a map. These patterns, she explained, were not random but meaningful signals, indicators of direction, strength, and the moods of the sea. To the untrained eye, she said, the ocean's surface may appear chaotic, but to those who listen with their eyes and hands, it tells a story. With patient guidance, she led the apprentices to the water's edge, where a gentle swell rolled steadily toward the shore. The sunlight glimmered on the crests of the waves, each one a delicate arc of motion and light. The apprentices knelt, extending their hands just above the water, feeling the subtle vibrations carried by the shifting currents and the caress of the breeze. Hina encouraged them to watch closely how the wind affected the waves, not just their size or direction, but their texture and movement. She explained how changes in wind speed could alter the shape of the waves, how shifts in direction created swirling patterns and foam lines, and how the interaction of wind with currents and underwater reefs added further complexity. The apprentices practiced observing these nuances, discussing their impressions and hypotheses. Some noted how the waves seemed smoother near the reef, broken up by coral and shallows, while others pointed out the sharper peaks formed where wind gusts struck the open water. The dialogue was slow and thoughtful, filled with pauses that allowed observation to deepen and insight to emerge. Later, Hina took the group aboard the canoes, moving out beyond the reef where the ocean's surface was wider and more dynamic. The apprentices felt the wind catch the sails and the rhythmic pull of the paddles as they cut through the water. Here, the lessons gained on land took on new significance. The apprentices learned to interpret the feel of the wind against the sails, the movement of the canoe in response to waves and currents, and the delicate balance required to harness these forces safely and efficiently. The challenge was greater on the open water. The wind was less predictable, influenced by distant weather systems and shifting air masses. The apprentices learned to adjust their posture and technique in response, to listen to the sounds of the sails and the water, and to trust the subtle sensations transmitted through the hull in their bodies. Hina reminded them that these experiences were the foundation of navigational wisdom. "Every journey is a lesson," she said. "The wind teaches us to be present, to respond with care, and to respect the power that moves us." Her words echoed in the steady rhythm of paddles and the soft murmur of the sea. Over time, the apprentices began to recognize the interplay between wind and water as a language, one that required not only knowledge, but also intuition and empathy. They saw how the wind's touch could calm or provoke the waves, how the sea's response was both immediate and complex, and how understanding this dialogue was essential for safe passage and successful navigation. At the close of the day, back on the shore, the apprentices gathered in a circle beneath the stars, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a small fire. They shared their reflections, the successes and uncertainties of their lessons, and the quiet moments when the wind had seemed to speak directly to them. Ray spoke softly about the feeling of becoming attuned to these invisible forces, not as masters controlling the wind, but as humble listeners learning to move in harmony with it. "It is a patience," she said, "a willingness to surrender and yet remain vigilant, to trust the wind even when it is unpredictable." Hina nodded, a gentle smile touching her lips. "That is the essence," she said. "The wind is a teacher of respect and resilience. It asks us to embrace uncertainty and to find our place within the vastness of the ocean." The night deepened around them, the sounds of the island settling into quiet rhythms. The wind whispered softly through the palms, carrying with it the endless stories of voyages past and those yet to come. And so, the apprentices' journey continued, measuring wind in their fingertips, listening with their whole being, and learning to navigate not just the seas, but the subtle currents of life itself. What new mysteries will the wind reveal as they grow ever more attuned to its silent language? How will these lessons shape the paths they choose, both on water and beyond? The dawn light filtered softly through the thick canopy of coconut palms, casting dappled shadows on the sandy ground where the apprentices gathered once more. The air was cool and moist, carrying the faint scent of the sea mingled with the earthy aroma of tropical flora. This morning promised another lesson in the ever-evolving conversation between wind, water, and the senses. A lesson that would deepen their connection to the natural world and to the ancient wisdom carried on each breeze. Hina, calm and steady as ever, welcomed the apprentices with a quiet nod. She explained that today's focus would be on the interplay of wind currents and their subtle effects on navigation, not just the immediate sensation of air against skin, but the broader patterns that shaped the routes across open ocean. Understanding the wind, she said, means learning to perceive not only what is near, but also what lies beyond the horizon, unseen, yet profoundly felt. The group began with an exercise in stillness and attention. Each apprentice was instructed to find a quiet spot on the shore, close their eyes, and open their senses to the full environment. The sounds of waves breaking gently on the reef, the distant call of seabirds, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze formed a symphony of nature's whispers. The apprentices focused on the flow of air, its direction, temperature, moisture, and subtle shifts. After several minutes of silent observation, Hina asked the group to share what they felt. Some spoke of a cool current flowing from the east, others of a dry, warm air moving from inland. They described the way the wind seemed to carry the faint scent of rain from distant islands, mingled with the saltiness of the ocean. These observations, though intangible, were the threads of a larger tapestry, a network of forces that navigators needed to interpret with care. Hina then led the apprentices to a nearby hill that overlooked the archipelago, providing a vantage point where the patterns of the sea and sky could be seen in greater detail. From here, the wind was more complex, shaped by the geography of the islands, the heating and cooling of land and water, and the rhythms of day and night. The apprentices watched as currents twisted and shifted, noting the interplay of shadows on the waves and the movement of clouds above. She explained how ancient navigators had learned to read these patterns, combining sensory knowledge with memory and tradition. The elders had passed down stories and techniques that linked specific wind behaviors with seasons, fishing cycles, and safe passages between islands. These were lessons not found in books but in lived experience, observation, and careful listening. As the day progressed, the apprentices embarked on a voyage across the lagoon in their canoes, guided by Hina's steady presence. The wind caught the sails gently at first, then with increasing strength, testing their ability to adapt and respond. They practiced adjusting their course and the angle of their sails based on the subtle changes in wind direction and speed, learning to anticipate shifts rather than react after the fact. The rhythmic pull of paddles and the creak of wood melded with the sounds of waves and wind, creating a quiet harmony of movement. Each apprentice felt the dynamic balance between control and surrender, the need to steer with intention while yielding to the natural forces that propelled them forward. During moments of calm, when the wind dropped to a mere whisper, the apprentices sensed the stillness as a part of the journey, a pause that invited reflection and renewed attention. Hina reminded them that understanding the wind included recognizing these lulls, moments when silence carried as much meaning as sound. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the water, the apprentices returned to shore, their minds filled with the lessons of the day. Gathered once more beneath the sheltering palms, they shared their experiences, moments of certainty and doubt, of connection and challenge. Ray spoke quietly of how the wind had felt like a living presence, guiding her through unseen paths and inviting her to trust in something beyond the tangible. "It is a conversation," she said, "between us and the world, spoken in a language of sensation and memory." Hina nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. The wind carries the stories of our ancestors, the wisdom of the sea, and the promise of the future. To listen deeply is to join this ongoing dialogue, to become part of a lineage that stretches across time. That night, as the stars emerged in the clear sky, the apprentices lay on the sand, the wind brushing softly against their faces. They gazed upward, tracing constellations with their eyes, feeling the pulse of the world around them. The lessons of the wind were no longer abstract concepts, but threads woven into the fabric of their being. The question that lingered in the stillness was one of connection and possibility. How could they carry this wisdom forward, honoring tradition while navigating a changing world? What new challenges would test their understanding, and how would the silent language of the wind continue to guide them? The journey of measuring wind in fingertips, of listening with whole bodies and open hearts, was far from complete. It was a path of patience, presence, and profound respect. A journey that promised to shape not only the apprentices, but the generations yet to come. The dawn unfolded gently over the Society Islands, the soft glow of the sun filtering through the thick canopy of palms, casting intricate shadows that danced slowly across the warm sand. The air was alive with the hum of insects, the distant calls of seabirds, and the steady whisper of the breeze weaving through the leaves. For the apprentices gathered beneath the sprawling branches of a venerable breadfruit tree, The morning promised another lesson, not in rote knowledge but in the subtle art of attunement, a deeper communion with the wind and the living world it shaped. Hina stood quietly, her presence calm and assured. Years of experience had honed her to a keen sensitivity, enabling her to read the faintest shifts in air and light, to interpret the invisible currents that carried meaning beyond words. Today, she intended to guide her students beyond the immediate and tangible, inviting them into the more elusive realm of intuition and memory. As we have learned, she began, her voice low and steady, the wind is not merely air in motion, it is a thread that connects the earth, sea, and sky. It carries stories of distant lands, of past voyages, of seasons that turn and return. To navigate by the wind is to listen deeply, not just with the body, but with the spirit. The apprentices listened, their eyes reflecting a mix of reverence and curiosity. They had spent months cultivating their awareness, feeling the wind on their skin, watching its dance with the waves, sensing its moods. But this lesson promised to delve into the unseen, how memory and story became woven into the very fabric of their knowledge. Hina led the group to a quiet cove where the ocean stretched out like a vast mirror, reflecting the changing sky. The water was calm, broken only by gentle ripples stirred by the faintest of breezes. Here, she asked the apprentices to sit in silence, closing their eyes and breathing slowly, opening themselves to the sensations around them. Listen, she urged softly, not just to the sounds, but to the spaces between, the pauses, the whispers carried on the air. The wind speaks in silence as much as in motion. It carries echoes of those who came before, their knowledge and their hopes. Minutes passed in stillness, the group absorbed in the subtle interplay of sound, scent, and sensation. Then, one by one, the apprentices began to speak, of dreams that had visited them in the night, of fleeting images of canoes and stars, of voices carried faintly on the breeze. These shared experiences were more than coincidence. They were the intangible threads linking present and past. Hina nodded, affirming these insights. Our ancestors understood that knowledge was not only learned, but felt and remembered in many ways. The stories of the wind are alive, passed down through generations not only in words but in practice and presence. The conversation turned to the role of elders in this transmission of knowledge. The apprentices learned that much of their understanding came from oral tradition. As night fell, the apprentices returned to shore, their bodies weary but their spirits enriched. Around the fire, they shared stories of the day, moments of insight, challenge, and connection. The elders spoke of the sacred duty to carry this knowledge forward, to honor the wind not as a tool, but as a teacher and companion. Ray, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames, spoke softly of the transformation she felt within herself, a growing sense of belonging to a lineage that extended beyond time and place. The wind has become more than a lesson, she said. It is a part of me, a voice that calls me to listen deeper and walk humbly. Hina smiled, a quiet pride shining through her calm demeanor. That is the journey, she said. Not to conquer, but to become part of the flow, an eternal rhythm that connects us all. The night embraced the island, the wind whispering ancient secrets through the palms and across the water. The apprentices lay beneath the stars, their minds filled with the vastness of the ocean and the intimacy of the wind's touch. What stories will the wind carry tomorrow? How will the apprentices continue to weave their own voices into this timeless dialogue? The journey of measuring wind in fingertips and remembering with heart and spirit was only beginning. The soft glow of dawn spilled gently over the Society Islands, filtering through the dense canopy of palm trees and bathing the shoreline in hues of pale gold and soft lavender. The ocean stretched endlessly before the apprentices, a vast expanse of shifting blue-green, its surface alive with the dance of light and shadow. The air carried a delicate scent, a mixture of salt spray, tropical blossoms, and the faint earthiness of the volcanic soil beneath their feet. It was a morning ripe with quiet promise, perfect for a day dedicated to the subtle art of understanding the wind and its intimate conversation with the sea. Hina gathered the apprentices at the edge of the lagoon, her figure steady and serene amidst the gentle rustling of the palms. Her voice, calm and measured, invited them to lean into the stillness. "Today," she began, "we explore the ways the wind shapes not only our journey, but the very fabric of our environment. The wind carries stories of the world's pulse, whispers of distant storms, and the breath of life itself." The apprentices nodded, their faces illuminated by a quiet eagerness that reflected the weight of the knowledge they sought. They had come to understand that the wind was far more than a physical force. It was a living language, one that required patience, humility, and a deepening sensitivity to interpret. Hina led the group to a rocky outcrop overlooking the open ocean, where the waves broke in steady rhythms against the jagged coral reefs below. From this vantage point, the apprentices could observe the interaction between wind and water with greater clarity, the way gusts stirred whitecaps, how the swells shifted direction in response to unseen currents, and how the sky itself seemed to breathe in harmony with the sea. She instructed the apprentices to close their eyes and breathe deeply, attuning their senses to the myriad signals carried on the air. The scent of salt mingled with hints of rain from distant clouds, and the gentle sway of palms carried the subtle rhythm of the breeze. "Let the wind speak to you," Hina whispered. "Feel its textures, its moods, its stories." After several moments of stillness, the apprentices shared their impressions. Some described the wind as cool and refreshing, others as carrying a hint of moisture that promised change. They spoke of the way the waves responded, a delicate interplay of rise and fall, acceleration and pause. Each observation added a new thread to the tapestry of understanding they were weaving. Hina then transitioned to a lesson in tracking the wind's changing patterns over time. She explained how ancient navigators observed not only the immediate direction and strength, but also the subtle shifts that signaled seasonal transitions and the approach of weather systems. These patterns were often encoded in oral traditions, chants, stories, and rituals that preserved knowledge across generations. The apprentices listened attentively as Hina recounted tales of long voyages undertaken with careful attention to these invisible cues. Navigators would read the sky, sea, and wind as one interconnected whole, their senses trained to anticipate and respond to the ever-changing environment. It was a practice rooted in respect for nature's power and unpredictability. Later, aboard their canoes, the apprentices practiced applying these lessons. The wind caught the sails with varying intensity, at times playful and light, at others insistent and commanding. The apprentices adjusted their positions and the angle of their sails, learning to respond with fluidity and grace. The water beneath their craft reflected the sky's moods, sometimes calm and mirror-like, sometimes churned into frothy turbulence. The physical demands of these exercises were tempered by the mental focus required. Each apprentice learned to trust their instincts while remaining open to correction, embracing the delicate balance between control and surrender. They felt their bodies becoming attuned instruments, responsive to the smallest nuances of wind and wave. Throughout the day, the apprentices took turns sharing their thoughts and challenges. Some spoke of moments when the wind seemed to carry messages, an inexplicable sense of direction or timing that transcended conscious understanding. Others admitted frustration when the wind shifted unpredictably, testing their confidence and resolve. Hina encouraged them to view these experiences as part of the learning process. "The wind is a living teacher," she reminded them. "It offers lessons in patience, adaptability, and humility. There will always be mysteries beyond our grasp, but in the pursuit of understanding, we deepen our connection to the world and ourselves." As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon with hues of amber and rose. The apprentices returned to shore. The air cooled, carrying the gentle promise of nightfall and the renewed whispers of the wind. Gathered around a small fire, they reflected on the day's journey, not only across the water, but within themselves. Ray, her voice soft with contemplation, shared how she had begun to sense the wind as a companion, a guide that required not only attention, but respect and trust. "It is like learning a language that is felt rather than heard," she said. "A language that speaks to the heart as much as to the mind." Hina smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight's flicker. "Yes," she agreed. "To measure wind in your fingertips is to measure your own patience, presence, and humility. It is a practice of listening to the world, to history, and to the silent spaces within." The night settled around the island like a gentle cloak. The stars emerged, scattered across the velvet sky, their light mingling with the soft glow of distant lanterns from neighboring villages. The wind continued its quiet song, weaving through the palms and over the water, carrying the endless stories of the sea and sky. In this stillness, the apprentices understood that their journey was not toward mastery, but toward harmony, a lifelong dance with the wind, a conversation without end. What new insights would the wind reveal in the days to come? How would the apprentices deepen their listening and their understanding? The path ahead was vast and open, filled with quiet promise and the endless rhythm of the natural world. The dawn broke softly over the Society Islands, the sky painted in pastel hues of pink and gold, blending gently with the calm ocean below. The air was warm and humid, carrying the mixed fragrances of salt water and tropical blooms. As the apprentices gathered along the shoreline, their breaths mingled with the cool morning breeze, the steady rhythm of waves lapping against the coral reef, providing a quiet soundtrack to the day's unfolding lessons. Today's focus would deepen their understanding of the interplay between wind, water, and intuition, a connection essential for navigating the vast Pacific expanses. Hina stood before them, her presence both grounded and serene, embodying the wisdom she sought to impart. "The wind is not simply a force to be measured or controlled," she began, her voice calm yet compelling. "It is a living entity that carries knowledge, history, and guidance. To navigate by the wind is to engage in a dialogue, a continuous exchange between ourselves and the natural world. We must learn to listen, to feel, and to respond with humility and grace." She invited the apprentices to walk along the rocky shoreline, where waves broke gently over ancient coral formations. Here, the shifting patterns of foam and spray provided visible markers of the wind's changing moods. The apprentices observed how even subtle shifts in breeze could alter the shape and direction of the waves, their crests curling and folding in response to unseen currents and gusts. Hina explained that ancient navigators had long relied on such observations, reading the sea's surface as a complex and ever-changing map. The apprentices knelt by the water's edge, running their fingers through the cool spray, feeling the texture of the foam and the pulse of the ocean beneath. Hina encouraged them to close their eyes and sense the wind's nuances, not just its strength or direction, but its temperature, humidity, and scent. These subtle qualities, she explained, often heralded shifts in weather and sea conditions long before they became visible. In the silence that followed, a shared attentiveness blossomed among the group. The apprentices described sensations, a sudden chill hinting at rain on the horizon, the dry warmth of a distant breeze from the island's interior, the mingled scents of seaweed and blooming flowers carried on the air. Each detail was a clue, a part of the greater mosaic that the wind painted across their environment. Hina then led the group to a vantage point atop a nearby hill, offering a sweeping view of the archipelago's scattered islands and the vast ocean beyond. From here, the apprentices could see the patterns of cloud and wave, the shifting shadows cast by the sun's morning arc. She pointed out how the interaction between the islands and prevailing winds created localized currents and eddies, factors crucial for safe and efficient navigation. As they prepared to embark on a voyage across the lagoon, the apprentices discussed how their observations might influence decisions, which route to take, how to adjust sails, when to anticipate a lull or a strengthening breeze. The practical application of their knowledge was a reminder that this was not mere theory, but a vital skill for survival and connection. Aboard the canoes, the apprentices felt the wind's embrace anew. The sails caught the morning breeze, filling steadily and propelling their vessels forward with a smooth, rhythmic motion. The apprentices adjusted their grips and postures in response to the wind's subtle fluctuations, learning to move as part of the whole rather than against it. The ocean responded in kind, its surface rising and falling with the interplay of wind and current. The journey was marked by moments of quiet reflection, as well as bursts of focused activity. Apprentices shared insights and questions, deepening their collective understanding. They noticed how the wind's texture changed as it passed over the land and water, how its scent carried different messages depending on its source. Hina reminded them that this knowledge was layered, combining sensory perception, memory, and cultural wisdom. As the afternoon waned, the apprentices faced a sudden shift in conditions. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind began to increase in strength and unpredictability. This tested their skills and composure. Hina guided them calmly through adjustments in sail and course, emphasizing the importance of patience and adaptability in the face of nature's caprice. The sea grew restless, the waves building in height and complexity. The apprentices felt the weight of the moment, how their preparation and attentiveness could mean the difference between safety and danger. Each decision was measured, each movement deliberate, a dance with the unseen forces that governed their voyage. When the storm passed, the apprentices returned to shore, their bodies tired, but their spirits enriched by the challenges they had faced. Around a fire beneath the gathering dusk, they shared stories of resilience and insight, reflecting on the lessons learned from the wind and sea. Ray spoke softly of the transformation she felt, not just in skill, but in relationship. The wind has become a teacher, a guide that asks for trust and openness. It reminds me that I am part of a larger whole, connected to the past and to the world around me. Hina nodded, her gaze steady. To navigate is to be present, to honor the wisdom of those who came before, and to listen with humility to the world's ongoing story. The wind is a living thread that ties us across time and space. As night embraced the islands, the apprentices lay beneath the star-studded sky, the cool breeze brushing gently against their skin. The ocean's vastness and the wind's silent song enveloped them, a reminder that their journey was part of an ancient and unending dialogue. What new patterns will the wind reveal? How will the apprentices continue to deepen their listening and understanding? The path forward was both wide and winding, illuminated by the quiet pulse of nature's breath. The early light of dawn crept softly over the Society Islands, painting the sky in gentle hues of coral and lavender. The ocean lay calm, a vast mirror reflecting the awakening world, its surface barely disturbed by the faintest whisper of breeze. The apprentices gathered near the shore, their figures silhouetted against the soft glow, ready to deepen their understanding of the wind, its invisible currents, its subtle moods, and the ancient wisdom it carried across the endless Pacific. Hina stood among them, her eyes steady and her voice low and measured. "The wind is a language spoken without words," she said, "a message carried across the seas and through time. To learn this language is to connect not only with the world around us, but with those who have navigated before, trusting in the same breath of air that guides us now." The group moved to a narrow ridge overlooking the lagoon, where the interplay of wind and water could be observed in exquisite detail. From this vantage point, the apprentices saw the complex dance of sea swells and wind patterns, the way currents shifted as they passed over coral reefs, and through channels between islands. Hina explained that the surface of the ocean was a living map, its textures and movements telling stories that could guide the careful navigator. They practiced reading the subtle variations, the smoothness of a wave face signaling a change in wind strength, the clustering of foam lines revealing hidden currents, the shift in color indicating depth and underwater terrain. Each detail was a clue woven into the larger narrative of the voyage. Hina reminded the apprentices that these observations were only part of the story. The wind's texture, its temperature, moisture, and direction carried additional information essential for safe passage. She asked the apprentices to close their eyes and reach out with their senses, feeling the breath of the wind on their skin, noting its coolness or warmth, its dryness or dampness. The apprentices shared their impressions, the fresh coolness of a sea breeze carrying the promise of morning, the heavier warmth hinting at rain or the influence of land masses. They spoke of the way the air shifted subtly, signaling changes in weather or the approach of distant storms. These were not just sensory details, but vital messages encoded in nature. With this knowledge, the group set out across the lagoon in their canoes, the sails catching the morning breeze as the water rippled gently beneath them. The apprentices practiced adjusting their course and sail trim to harness the wind's varying strength and direction. They learned to move with the wind's flow, anticipating shifts rather than reacting after they occurred. The sea beneath them was a constant presence, its surface shifting with the interaction of wind and current. The apprentices felt the pulse of the ocean through the hulls of their canoes, the rhythmic motion creating a connection that grounded them in the moment. They learned to sense changes in wave pattern and wind gusts, responding with practiced movements that balanced control and surrender. As the day progressed, the wind grew stronger and more variable. The apprentices faced new challenges, gusts that caught the sails unexpectedly, lulls that required swift adaptation. Hina guided them patiently, emphasizing the importance of attentiveness and flexibility. The wind does not bend to our will, she reminded them, but we can learn to move with it, to become part of its rhythm. During moments of calm between the stronger gusts, the apprentices reflected on their progress. They spoke of the growing trust they felt in their own senses, in the wind, and in the collective knowledge passed down through generations. They recognized that navigation was as much a mental and spiritual practice as a physical one. Later, clouds gathered on the horizon, signaling an approaching weather change. The apprentices prepared their canoes and adjusted their course, using the wind's shifting patterns to guide their decisions. They felt the urgency and responsibility of their task, not only for their own safety, but for the continuity of a tradition that connected them to their ancestors and the natural world. The storm arrived with a sudden intensity. The wind howled, driving waves that tossed the canoes with fierce energy. The apprentices, drawing on their training and the calm presence of Hina, managed their vessels with skill and care. Every movement was deliberate, every decision weighed against the forces arrayed around them. Through the tempest, the apprentices learned to trust the lessons of the wind and sea, to listen with heightened senses and respond with calm resolve. The experience was both humbling and empowering, a reminder of the delicate balance between human will and nature's power. When the storm passed, the sea settled back into a steady rhythm. The apprentices returned to shore, their bodies weary, but their spirits strengthened by the trials they had faced. Around the fire that evening, they shared stories of resilience, insight, and connection. Ray spoke softly of how the wind had become more than a force. It was a guide, a teacher, a thread linking past and present. Hina affirmed this, her gaze steady in the firelight. To navigate is to be in relationship with the wind, the sea, and each other. It is a practice of listening, learning, and honoring. The wind carries not just air, but the stories of our ancestors and the hopes of those yet to come. As night embraced the islands, the apprentices lay beneath a sky crowded with stars, the cool night breeze whispering through the palms. They felt themselves part of a timeless dialogue, a conversation that stretched across oceans and generations. What new lessons will the wind reveal as the apprentices continue their journey? How will their growing connection to this living language shape their paths and the stories they carry forward? The morning unfolded quietly over the Society Islands, the sun's first light spilling softly across the water, casting long reflections that shimmered like threads of gold on the gentle waves. The air was warm but fresh, carrying a subtle mingling of salt and earth, and the distant calls of seabirds echoed softly through the calm. The apprentices gathered once more by the shore, their faces still carrying the traces of the challenges and lessons from days past, yet alight with the quiet excitement of discovery. Hina stood among them, steady as ever, her eyes reflecting a deep calm born from years of attuned observation and practice. "Today," she said softly, "we move deeper into the dance between wind and water. We will explore the ways the wind carries memory, not only of the seasons and skies, but of those who have sailed before us. To measure wind in our fingertips is to touch the pulse of history itself." The apprentices listened intently as they followed her to a low ridge overlooking the lagoon. From this vantage point, the expanse of ocean lay open before them, its surface a complex tapestry of shifting light and shadow, influenced by the ever-changing wind. Hina encouraged them to look not just with their eyes, but with their whole being, to feel the rhythm of the waves, the direction of the breeze, the scents carried by the air. They closed their eyes, drawing deep breaths, allowing the sounds of the sea and the whispers of the wind to fill their awareness. In this stillness, the apprentices began to sense something beyond the physical. The stories embedded in the patterns around them, the legacy of countless journeys woven into the fabric of the ocean and sky. Hina spoke of the elders who had come before, the masters of star mapping and navigation, who held the knowledge of wind patterns like sacred songs. These elders had understood that the wind was more than a tool. It was a living archive, carrying memories of voyages, of triumphs and losses, of lessons passed through generations. Their teachings were embodied in chants, dances, and rituals that sustained the connection between people and place. The apprentices practiced recalling these teachings, repeating the rhythms of chants that described the winds and the stars, the movements of the waves and the signs in the sky. This was more than memory. It was an act of preservation, a way to keep the lineage alive. Each phrase, each gesture, was a link in a chain that stretched across time and space. As the day progressed, the apprentices prepared to set out once again on the water. Their canoes, sleek and steady, awaited them at the shore, ready to carry them on the next leg of their journey. The wind was gentle but steady, filling the sails with a quiet promise. The apprentices felt the familiar tension and release, the constant negotiation between control and surrender that defined their craft. Paddles dipped rhythmically into the sea, the canoes gliding forward with measured grace. The apprentices moved with growing confidence, responding to the wind's subtle shifts, adjusting their sails and course with increasing skill. The ocean beneath them was a living partner, its waves rising and falling in sync with the breath of the wind. Hina guided them carefully, reminding them to remain attentive not only to the external environment, but to their own senses and intuition. Navigation, she said, is a dialogue. We listen to the world and to ourselves, balancing knowledge with feeling, reason with presence. The group encountered a patch of turbulent water where shifting currents met the wind, creating unpredictable waves and gusts. This tested the apprentices' ability to maintain balance and composure. They adjusted their techniques, learning to read the signs of the water's movement and anticipate the wind's behavior. Mistakes were met with patience and encouragement. Every challenge was an opportunity for growth. As the sun climbed higher, the sky filled with the low hum of insects and the distant roar of waves breaking on the reef. The apprentices took turns sharing their reflections, moments when the wind had felt like a guide, leading them toward unseen paths, and times when it had challenged their assumptions, pushing them to deepen their understanding. Ray spoke of a moment when the wind shifted unexpectedly, carrying a scent that reminded her of a story an elder had told, a tale of a voyage where the changing breeze had meant the difference between safe passage and peril. "It felt as if the wind was telling me something, a warning or an invitation," she said softly. Hina nodded, affirming the importance of such experiences. The wind carries wisdom beyond the immediate. It is a teacher of patience and humility, reminding us that we are part of a larger story, one that is still unfolding. As the day waned, the apprentices returned to shore, their bodies tired but their spirits enriched. They gathered beneath the spreading branches of a large tree, the shade offering respite from the afternoon sun. Here, they reflected on the connection between the physical act of navigation and the deeper currents of memory and meaning. Hina spoke of the responsibility they bore as carriers of this knowledge, to honor the past, to listen carefully in the present, and to pass on the teachings with care and reverence. The apprentices understood that their journey was not only one of skill, but of stewardship, a commitment to the living legacy of their people and the environment. As the light softened and shadows lengthened, the apprentices lay quietly, the wind caressing their faces, the distant stars beginning to emerge in the twilight sky. The ocean whispered its ancient song, a reminder of the vastness and mystery that framed their path. What stories will the wind carry as the apprentices continue their journey? How will the lessons of patience, presence, and memory shape their future voyages and the lives they touch? The morning light filtered softly through the swaying palms of the Society Islands, casting a serene glow across the shoreline where the apprentices gathered for what felt like both an ending and a beginning. The ocean stretched before them, vast and endless, its surface gently rippling under the caress of a mild breeze. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth, mingling with the faint fragrance of tropical flowers. It was a moment suspended between day and night, between certainty and the unknown, a fitting time to reflect on the journey they had undertaken. Hina's voice was calm and steady as she addressed the group, her presence as grounding as the earth beneath their feet. "We have traveled far, not only across the waters but within ourselves," she said softly. "To measure wind in fingertips is to measure patience, humility, and presence. It is a conversation with the world, a practice that stretches beyond time and place." The apprentices listened, their faces reflecting a quiet reverence. The lessons they had absorbed were many, observing the dance between wind and wave, feeling the language of the breeze, reading the subtle signs etched in the sea's surface. Yet, beyond the technical skill, they had come to understand something deeper. Navigation was an act of trust, of surrendering to forces greater than oneself while remaining deeply attentive and engaged. Hina spoke of the ancestors who had first charted these vast waters, relying not on instruments, but on the living memory encoded in wind, wave, and star. These navigators had cultivated an intimate relationship with the natural world, weaving stories and chants into the fabric of their knowledge. Their wisdom was a legacy passed down through generations, a delicate thread connecting past, present, and future. The apprentices recalled moments from their journey, times when the wind seemed to speak directly to them, carrying messages that transcended the immediate and tangible. They remembered the challenges faced, the moments of uncertainty and adaptation, and the quiet triumphs born of patience and presence. Hina invited them to close their eyes and breathe deeply, feeling the rhythm of the wind as it moved through the palms and over the water. In this stillness, the group sensed the enduring pulse of the ocean and sky, the timeless dance of elements that had guided their voyage and countless others before. She spoke of the responsibility that came with this knowledge, not only to navigate safely, but to honor the living world and the traditions that sustained it. The wind was not a tool to be wielded, but a partner to be respected, a teacher that demanded humility and care. As the sun climbed higher, the apprentices prepared to embark on one final voyage, a symbolic journey to embody all they had learned. They launched their canoes into the gentle surf, feeling the familiar tension and release as the sails caught the morning breeze. The ocean welcomed them, its surface alive with shifting currents and patterns shaped by the wind. The voyage was both physical and spiritual, a moving meditation on connection and presence. The apprentices moved with increasing fluidity, their bodies and minds aligned with the subtle language of wind and wave. Each adjustment of sail, each shift in course, was a deliberate act of listening and responding, a dance that required patience and trust. Hina guided them through the route their ancestors had traveled, pointing out landmarks and explaining the significance of star positions, wind directions, and ocean currents. The apprentices felt themselves becoming part of an ancient continuum, their movements echoing those of navigators long gone but never forgotten. As the journey progressed, the weather shifted gently. A soft rain began to fall, mingling with the sea spray and the scent of wet earth. The apprentices embraced the change, sensing the renewal it symbolized. The wind, now carrying the freshness of rain, seemed to sing a new song, one of continuity and transformation. Returning to shore, the apprentices carried with them a profound sense of accomplishment and connection. The knowledge they had gained was more than practical skill. It was a living tradition, a sacred dialogue with the natural world and their heritage. They understood that their journey was ongoing, that each voyage would bring new lessons and deeper insight. Gathered around the evening fire, the apprentices shared their reflections, stories of discovery, challenge, and growth. They spoke of the wind not as an adversary or a mere element, but as a companion and guide, a voice that connected them to the past and beckoned toward the future. Hina closed their circle with words that resonated deeply. To measure wind in fingertips is to open yourself to the world's wisdom, to become a vessel for stories and knowledge that stretch across oceans and generations. Our task is to listen, to learn, and to carry this legacy forward with respect and care. The night settled around them, stars gleaming like distant fires, the ocean's gentle murmur a constant reminder of the vast, interconnected world they navigated together. The apprentices lay beneath the canopy of sky and palm, their spirits woven into the enduring rhythm of wind, wave, and memory. What new stories will the wind carry as these apprentices grow into masters of their craft? How will their deepening relationship with the natural world shape their journeys and the future of their people? Their voyage continues, quiet, steady, and full of possibility. Story transition. The apprentice learns to feel the wind, to trust what cannot be seen, to listen with the skin, not the ears. But knowledge doesn't always wait for readiness. And sometimes the sea calls too soon. Now, the story shifts to a young voyager. Not yet a master, not yet steady, but already far from shore, with only dried food in his pack and stars he was never taught to follow. He begins a journey where even the sky cannot be trusted. What happens when navigation must be learned mid-voyage? Let's drift. It was an act of preservation, a way to keep the lineage alive. Each phrase, each gesture, was a link in a chain that stretched across time and space. As the day progressed, the apprentices prepared to set out once again on the water. Their canoes, sleek and steady, awaited them at the shore, ready to carry them on the next leg of their journey. The wind was gentle but steady, filling the sails with a quiet promise. The apprentices felt the familiar tension and release, the constant negotiation between control and surrender that defined their craft. Paddles dipped rhythmically into the sea, the canoes gliding forward with measured grace. The apprentices moved with growing confidence, responding to the wind's subtle shifts, adjusting their sails and course with increasing skill. The ocean beneath them was a living partner, its waves rising and falling in sync with the breath of the wind. Hina guided them carefully, reminding them to remain attentive not only to the external environment, but to their own senses and intuition. Navigation, she said, is a dialogue. We listen to the world and to ourselves, balancing knowledge with feeling, reason with presence. The group encountered a patch of turbulent water where shifting currents met the wind, creating unpredictable waves and gusts. This tested the apprentices' ability to maintain balance and composure. They adjusted their techniques, learning to read the signs of the water's movement and anticipate the wind's behavior. Mistakes were met with patience and encouragement. Every challenge was an opportunity for growth. As the sun climbed higher, the sky filled with the low hum of insects and the distant roar of waves breaking on the reef. The apprentices took turns sharing their reflections, moments when the wind had felt like a guide, leading them toward unseen paths, and times when it had challenged their assumptions, pushing them to deepen their understanding. Ray spoke of a moment when the wind shifted unexpectedly, carrying a scent that reminded her of a story an elder had told, a tale of a voyage where the changing breeze had meant the difference between safe passage and peril. It felt as if the wind was telling me something, a warning or an invitation, she said softly. Hina nodded, affirming the importance of such experiences. The wind carries wisdom beyond the immediate. It is a teacher of patience and humility, reminding us that we are part of a larger story, one that is still unfolding. As the day waned, the apprentices returned to shore, their bodies tired but their spirits enriched. They gathered beneath the spreading branches of a large tree, the shade offering respite from the afternoon sun. Here, they reflected on the connection between the physical act of navigation and the deeper currents of memory and meaning. Hina spoke of the responsibility they bore as carriers of this knowledge, to honor the past, to listen carefully in the present, and to pass on the teachings with care and reverence. The apprentices understood that their journey was not only one of skill, but of stewardship, a commitment to the living legacy of their people and the environment. As the light softened and shadows lengthened, the apprentices lay quietly, the wind caressing their faces, the distant stars beginning to emerge in the twilight sky. The ocean whispered its ancient song, a reminder of the vastness and mystery that framed their path. What stories will the wind carry as the apprentices continue their journey? How will the lessons of patience, presence, and memory shape their future voyages and the lives they touch? The morning light filtered softly through the swaying palms of the Society Islands, casting a serene glow across the shoreline where the apprentices gathered for what felt like both an ending and a beginning. The ocean stretched before them, vast and endless, its surface gently rippling under the caress of a mild breeze. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth, mingling with the faint fragrance of tropical flowers. It was a moment suspended between day and night, between certainty and the unknown, a fitting time to reflect on the journey they had undertaken. Hina's voice was calm and steady as she addressed the group, her presence as grounding as the earth beneath their feet. We have traveled far, not only across the waters but within ourselves, she said softly. To measure wind in fingertips is to measure patience, humility, and presence. It is a conversation with the world, a practice that stretches beyond time and place. The apprentices listened, their faces reflecting a quiet reverence. The lessons they had absorbed were many, observing the dance between wind and wave, feeling the language of the breeze, reading the subtle signs etched in the sea's surface. Yet, beyond the technical skill, they had come to understand something deeper. Navigation was an act of trust, of surrendering to forces greater than oneself while remaining deeply attentive and engaged. Hina spoke of the ancestors who had first charted these vast waters. relying not on instruments, but on the living memory encoded in wind, wave, and star. These navigators had cultivated an intimate relationship with the natural world, weaving stories and chants into the fabric of their knowledge. Their wisdom was a legacy passed down through generations, a delicate thread connecting past, present, and future. The apprentices recalled moments from their journey, times when the wind seemed to speak directly to them, carrying messages that transcended the immediate and tangible. They remembered the challenges faced, the moments of uncertainty and adaptation, and the quiet triumphs born of patience and presence. Hina invited them to close their eyes and breathe deeply, feeling the rhythm of the wind as it moved through the palms and over the water. In this stillness, the group sensed the enduring pulse of the ocean and sky, the timeless dance of elements that had guided their voyage and countless others before. She spoke of the responsibility that came with this knowledge, not only to navigate safely, but to honor the living world and the traditions that sustained it. The wind was not a tool to be wielded, but a partner to be respected, a teacher that demanded humility and care. As the sun climbed higher, the apprentices prepared to embark on one final voyage, a symbolic journey to embody all they had learned. They launched their canoes into the gentle surf, feeling the familiar tension and release as the sails caught the morning breeze. The ocean welcomed them, its surface alive with shifting currents and patterns shaped by the wind. The voyage was both physical and spiritual, a moving meditation on connection and presence. The apprentices moved with increasing fluidity, their bodies and minds aligned with the subtle language of wind and wave. Each adjustment of sail, each shift in course, was a deliberate act of listening and responding, a dance that required patience and trust. Hina guided them through the route their ancestors had traveled, pointing out landmarks and explaining the significance of star positions, wind directions, and ocean currents. The apprentices felt themselves becoming part of an ancient continuum, their movements echoing those of navigators long gone but never forgotten. As the journey progressed, the weather shifted gently. A soft rain began to fall, mingling with the sea spray and the scent of wet earth. The apprentices embraced the change, sensing the renewal it symbolized. The wind, now carrying the freshness of rain, seemed to sing a new song, one of continuity and transformation. Returning to shore, the apprentices carried with them a profound sense of accomplishment and connection. The knowledge they had gained was more than practical skill. It was a living tradition, a sacred dialogue with the natural world and their heritage. They understood that their journey was ongoing, that each voyage would bring new lessons and deeper insight. Gathered around the evening fire, the apprentices shared their reflections, stories of discovery, challenge, and growth. They spoke of the wind not as an adversary or a mere element, but as a companion and guide, a voice that connected them to the past and beckoned toward the future. Hina closed their circle with words that resonated deeply. To measure wind in fingertips is to open yourself to the world's wisdom, to become a vessel for stories and knowledge that stretch across oceans and generations. Our task is to listen, to learn, and to carry this legacy forward with respect and care. The night settled around them, stars gleaming like distant fires, the ocean's gentle murmur a constant reminder of the vast, interconnected world they navigated together. The apprentices lay beneath the canopy of sky and palm, their spirits woven into the enduring rhythm of wind, wave, and memory. What new stories will the wind carry as these apprentices grow into masters of their craft? How will their deepening relationship with the natural world shape their journeys and the future of their people? Their voyage continues, quiet, steady, and full of possibility. Story transition. The apprentice learns to feel the wind, to trust what cannot be seen, to listen with the skin, not the ears. But knowledge doesn't always wait for readiness, and sometimes the sea calls too soon. Now, the story shifts to a young voyager. Not yet a master, Not yet steady, but already far from shore, with only dried food in his pack and stars he was never taught to follow. He begins a journey where even the sky cannot be trusted. What happens when navigation must be learned mid-voyage? Let's drift there now.